I've always enjoyed being alone. That's why 3 years ago I bought a small cabin in the woods, far away from everything. No neighbors, no city noise, no distractions. Just me, my books, my fishing rod, and the endless stretch of trees surrounding my property. The cabin sat at the edge of an old forest. Tall pines swayed gently in the wind, and at night, the sounds of distant owls or the rustling leaves were my only company. It was peaceful, exactly what I wanted. The first few months were perfect. I spent my days fishing at the nearby lake and my evenings on the porch, sipping coffee as the sun dipped behind the trees. Life felt simple, quiet, and safe. But then, little things started happening. First, it was easy to dismiss. A few strange noises at night, soft cracking sounds, like branches snapping somewhere out in the dark. Probably deer or maybe raccoons, I thought. The forest was alive after all. Then came the tapping. Late one night, as I lay in bed reading, I heard it. Top, top, top. It was faint but distinct, coming from somewhere outside. Maybe a branch knocking against the side of the house. I told myself. I got up, walked to the window, and peeked out. The moon was bright, casting long shadows across the yard. But I saw nothing. The tapping stopped. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if it would return. After a few minutes of silence, I shrugged it off, closed the curtains, and went back to bed. A few nights passed without incident. But then it came back. The same tapping, always around the same time, between 2 and 3 in the morning. But this time it was louder. I sat up, heart beating a little faster. Top, top, top. Not against the wall. This time it was at the window. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly approached, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. I swept the beam of light across the yard. Nothing. The trees stood still. The night was calm. No animals. No people. Just darkness. I tried to calm myself. The isolation was probably playing tricks on my mind. The next night, I double-checked all the doors and windows before bed. Everything was locked tight, but that didn't stop the tapping. This time it was even closer, almost calculated. Top, 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 and then scratch, scratch. Something dragged lightly across the glass. Not forcefully, like it was trying not to be heard. I froze, listening, holding my breath. The scratching continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I didn't dare pull the curtain back this time. Instead, I stood there in the dark, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Finally, after what felt like hours, the silence returned. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I decided to check around the house. I walked the perimeter, inspecting every window. At the window of the spare bedroom, the one where I had heard the scratching, I noticed something odd. On the wooden frame beneath the glass, small marks. Thin, curved scratches, like something sharp had lightly dragged across it. I leaned in closer. The marks were fresh. Animal claws? A bird? Maybe, but something about them felt deliberate. That afternoon, I installed motion sensor lights around the cabin. If anything was coming close at night, I'd see it. That evening, as the sun set and the woods darkened, I sat on the porch watching. The motion lights flickered on and off a few times as the wind moved the trees. I stayed up late, determined to catch whatever it was. But that night, nothing happened.
No tapping. No scratching.
Just the wind. I felt a small sense of relief. Maybe it really was just some animal that had moved on. But that relief didn't last. For a few nights, things stayed quiet. I started convincing myself it had been nothing. Maybe the wind, maybe animals, maybe just my own paranoia. But deep down, I still felt uneasy. That kind of unease that sits in your stomach and refuses to leave. A few days later, it returned. I was sitting in the living room late at night, reading like I usually did, when I heard it again. Top, top, top. This time, not from the spare bedroom window. It was coming from the kitchen, the window just a few feet away. I froze. The tapping was soft, steady, almost gentle, like whoever or whatever was out there was testing me. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I simply sat in my chair, staring toward the dark kitchen. The The tapping stopped. I grabbed my flashlight, but I couldn't bring myself to go to the window. Instead, I stood there for what felt like forever, heart pounding, listening to the silence that had replaced the tapping. Eventually, I worked up the courage to approach. Step by step, I crept into the kitchen. The flashlight beam shook slightly in my hand as I reached for the curtain. I pulled it back quickly, shining the light outside. Nothing, just the woods. The same tall pines, unmoving in the still night air. But that's when I noticed something new. Footprints. In the dirt beneath the window. They weren't animal tracks. Human footprints. Bare feet. And they were fresh. The prints led from the tree line to the side of the house and stopped right under the window. No tracks leading away. No indication of which direction whoever made them had gone. I stepped back from the window, locking it tightly. My mind raced. Who would be out here? There were no neighbors for miles. No roads nearby.
No campsites.
Nobody. The fear started to settle deeper in my chest. This wasn't an animal. This was someone. But who? And why? I checked every door and window that night. Twice. Everything was locked tight. Still, I couldn't sleep. Every small noise made my heart jump. The house creaked. The wind rustled the trees. The refrigerator hummed. But I kept hearing faint sounds, like breathing just outside the walls. I stayed awake until dawn, when the rising sun finally made the house feel safe again. The following day, I debated whether to call the police. But what would I even say? Someone knocked on my window in the middle of nowhere? They'd probably dismiss it as a prank or some lost hiker. Besides, I hadn't seen anyone, just footprints. Still, I wasn't willing to take chances. I pulled my old hunting rifle from the closet and kept it close. That night, I stayed in the living room again, rifle within reach, flashlight ready. Hours passed. Nothing. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. Still nothing. I began to relax, thinking maybe whoever it was had moved on. Then, right as I started to drift off in my chair, the lights outside triggered. The motion sensor at the back of the house. I shot upright, fully awake, heart slamming against my ribs. I grabbed the flashlight and rifle and carefully approached the back door. The porch light was on, casting a dim glow across the backyard. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, at the far edge of the light, just beyond where the woods began, something moved. A shadow. It stood still, tall, motionless, barely visible through the trees. I raised the flashlight and aimed the beam toward it. But as soon as the light hit the figure, it stepped back into the darkness, vanishing into the forest. I stood frozen for a moment, breathing hard, scanning the trees. Nothing. Whoever it was, they were watching. I locked the back door, pulled every curtain shut, and stayed up the rest of the night, gun resting across my lap. The next morning, I inspected the area where I had seen the figure. More footprints. This time, there were more of them, circling the house, pacing. And something else, scratches on the wooden siding near several of the windows. Thin lines, as if fingertips or nails had lightly traced the walls. The reality was sinking in. This wasn't some lost hiker stumbling onto my property. Whoever or whatever was out there was coming back, repeatedly, night after night, watching me, testing me, waiting. The following days were the most unsettling of my life. I was no longer just paranoid, I was being hunted. Every night, the noises returned. The tapping, the scratching, the faintest sounds of movement just outside my windows. But it wasn't random anymore. It was coordinated, deliberate, always after midnight, always at a different window, like whoever it was wanted me to know they were there, but didn't want to be seen. I barely slept. I barely ate. I was constantly on edge. Every creak in the floorboards made me jump. Every gust of wind outside made my skin crawl. I installed extra locks on the doors, reinforced the windows. I even placed makeshift alarms, strings with bells attached to empty cans, around the perimeter. But deep down, I knew none of it would stop them if they really wanted to get in. The worst part was not knowing who or what I was dealing with. Human? Animal? Something else? I couldn't tell anymore. On the fourth night, things took a turn for the worse. I was sitting in the living room, lights off, rifle across my lap, staring out into the dark woods through a small gap in the curtains. The motion lights triggered again, this time on the east side of the house. I snapped the flashlight on and swept the beam across the yard. That's when I saw it. Two figures. Not one, two. Both standing just beyond the tree line. Barely visible. They weren't moving. Just standing. Watching. They looked tall, unnaturally tall. Thin frames. Pale skin that almost seemed to reflect the flashlight beam. Their faces, or what little I could make out, were wrong. Smooth. No clear features. Just hollow, dark spaces where eyes should have been. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stumbled back from the window, struggling to breathe. Panic flooded my chest. I tried to convince myself I was hallucinating, that fatigue and fear were twisting my perception. But deep down, I knew what I saw. This was no longer just someone stalking my property. I spent that entire night locked inside the house, lights off, sitting in the corner of my bedroom with the rifle pointed at the door. I didn't sleep, couldn't. Every few minutes I heard movement outside, heavy footsteps crunching leaves, occasional knocks on random windows, a soft tapping on the siding. And once, just once, I heard something that chilled my blood. Breathing, slow, heavy breathing, coming from right outside my bedroom wall, as if someone was standing there, leaning close, listening. By morning, the sound stopped. The sun rose like nothing had happened. The woods looked as peaceful as ever. Birds chirped. The breeze was calm. But I knew better. That morning, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here any longer. This was my home, my refuge, but it wasn't safe anymore. I started packing a small bag, planning to leave and stay in town for a while. But just as I was finishing, something caught my eye outside. Movement. At the far end of the property, near the old shed. A glimpse of a figure slipping behind it. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped out onto the porch. My heart raced as I approached the shed. The door was slightly ajar. I shone the light inside. Nothing. Just tools, old furniture, fishing gear. But something smelled off like damp earth and mold. Then I noticed something in the far corner. Pile of torn clothing. Old, tattered, and not mine. Some of it looked freshly torn. Pieces of dark fabric. A faint red stain on one sleeve. I backed away quickly, heart pounding. Whoever these visitors were, they had been inside my shed. And recently, as I stood there, frozen, I heard it again. Footsteps. Behind me. Slow, deliberate. I spun around with the flashlight. The beam landed on one of them, standing just beyond the edge of the light. His hollow eyes stared back at me, and then it stepped forward. The figure stepped into the light, now fully visible. Tall, far taller than any man I've ever seen. Thin, like its bones were barely holding its frame together. Its pale skin almost shimmered in the beam of my flashlight. But its face was the worst part. Smooth, almost featureless. Like wet clay that had been stretched and warped. But those hollow eyes, deep, empty sockets that somehow stared directly into me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature tilted its head slightly, almost curious. And then, behind it, another figure appeared. And then another. 3, standing together. All identical. All staring. Watching. The air around me grew colder. I could hear a faint whisper. Not coming from their mouths, but from everywhere at once. Like the trees themselves were whispering. They. I stumbled backward, almost dropping the flashlight. My instincts finally kicked in. I turned and ran. Ran faster than I've ever run before. Through the clearing, past the trees, my boots pounding the dirt as I sprinted toward the cabin. I could hear them behind me, not running, but moving. Quick, silent, always just out of sight. But I didn't look back. I reached the cabin, slammed the door shut, and bolted every lock. My chest heaved as I gasped for air. The whispers grew louder. Stay with us. Stay. The walls of the cabin seemed to hum with their voices. I grabbed the rifle and backed into the far corner of the living room, every light still off, hoping somehow the dark would shield me. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time didn't feel real anymore. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Knock, knock, knock. The front door, then the back door, and then the windows, knocking, all around, perfectly synchronized. Knock, 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 like they were testing the walls, testing my sanity. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out my phone and called 911. The operator answered quickly, but my voice was shaking too much to make sense. They're here. They're outside. They're trying to get in. The operator tried to calm me, asking for my address. I barely managed to give it before the line suddenly went dead. The phone screen blinked, no signal. The knocking stopped. Sudden silence. I held my breath, waiting. That silence was worse than the knocking. Then, footsteps. Inside. Creaking floorboards from the hallway. They were in. Somehow, they were inside the cabin. I pointed the rifle toward the hallway entrance. Every muscle in my body locked in place. A shadow appeared at the edge of the doorway. One of them, standing motionless. The whisper filled the room again, deafening now. Stay, stay, stay. I fired. The gunshot rang through the cabin, echoing out into the woods. The shadow vanished instantly, like smoke dissolving into thin air. I lowered the rifle, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Flashing lights suddenly filled the windows. Red and blue. The police. 2 officers burst through the front door moments later, weapons drawn. They found me curled in the corner, still gripping the rifle, barely able to speak. I don't remember much after that. They searched the house, the woods, the property. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no figures, no faces, no visitors. I stayed in a hotel for weeks after that. Eventually, I sold the cabin. Couldn't go back. The police called it stress, isolation, sleep deprivation. But I know what I saw. They were there. And sometimes, I still feel them. When I sit alone, late at night, I hear faint tapping sounds near my window, always around 3 a.m. And in the corner of my eye, just before I fall asleep, I sometimes see shadows standing still, waiting, watching. If you're ever driving through the Australian outback and you see a motel that shouldn't be there, don't stop. Keep driving, no matter how tired you are.